Happy Friday, Hokie Nation. Welcome back to TSL today. We switched up the set a little bit. I'm Giovanni Heater. Across the way, Kyle Marshak. David Cunningham's on the set, of course, and back behind the scenes, Carter Hill. Now we're going to talk a little bit of women's hoops. A little change in the script today, but I love it. And then we're going to get into the Tech Talk Live notes just briefly as well. Kyle, I'll let you tee it up first here for David.
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, Tech Talk Live was awesome the other day. I'll start with that. But David, when it comes to women's hoops, really nice to cleanse the palate after talking about a tough men's season so far. With the ACC schedule, dude, the way the ACC has been in the men's, you're talking about analytically, you look at the numbers, and although the rankings don't show it for men's, the ACC is as strong as it's ever been. Would you argue that's the same for women's basketball? Because I think the ACC is just star-studded right now for women's hoops.
Yeah, the ACC women's basketball, I would say the ACC men's conference is probably like the third or fourth best conference in the country, probably behind the Big 10 and the Big 12. Yeah. Not in any order, but ACC women's basketball is best conference in the country. It's not close. There was a point earlier in the year where the ACC literally had teams 7, 8, 9, 10 in the AP Top 25. It just so happens that, you know, in ACC women's basketball, you do 5-team pods, right? And Virginia Tech women's basketball's pod is NC State, Duke, Virginia, and North Carolina. So you play all of them twice. Well, 3 of those teams are ranked, and Virginia was dang close for a while. So you're playing all these teams twice. That's like 8 quadrant 1 opportunities right there. They beat Louisville, who's really, really good, lost to Notre Dame, lost to Miami and Clemson, but those teams are both pretty good. Top to bottom, this is a really good league. Pitt, who's probably the worst team at the bottom of the barrel, gave Tech a run for its money last night. So this is not, yes, to your question, this is probably the best the league has ever been.
Yeah, it's crazy how stacked it is right now. It's awesome. That's the first thing I thought of when you were mentioning it earlier in the previous recording with men's is, although the rankings don't reflect it for the men's, they're as strong as they've ever been across the board, just because the teams outside of the rankings are still knocking on the door. And if there isn't a team knocking on the door in the ACC for women's hoops, it's because they're already in the rankings. That's what it feels like right now for sure.
David, want to talk a little bit about, it feels like the scoring margin for this team was so big to start the season. Obviously, that had a factor in the fact that they were playing lower quality opponents. But then you get some closer games. Well, you lost on the road at Miami. Miami's a great team. A close game against a good Louisville team who's probably better than their record shows, to be quite honest. They were picked to finish at the top of the league. Pitt hangs in there. So just what is it about this team finishing late, but also at the same time maybe not dropping the 80 points they were earlier in the season?
I think it all goes back to teams are playing a zone. Teams are pretty much every single one of Virginia Tech's opponents over the last, I guess since December, really, since the end of December. Everybody's playing 2-3 zone against Tech or switching it up a little bit. Pitt pressed a little bit and played some zone. It's not fun to play against. As a Syracuse guy, you would know. It's, you know, Elizabeth Kitley is such a dynamic weapon that teams are basically saying, okay, we're going to try to eliminate her and we're going to make you score from the outside. And Tech's 3-point shooting hasn't been as good.
I was going to say, it's fun if you can shoot the lights out that night.
Yeah, you know, one of the reasons why is probably because Asia Shepherd left. You know,
right.
3-point school's all-time 3-point leader, ACC's all-time 3-point leader left. You know, Tech's still getting fine opportunities, but it's a much smaller clip that Tech's knocking down, and I think that kind of shortens the margins a little bit more. Tech's basically been faced with a zone for the past like 8 games, like zone after zone after zone after zone. And, you know, teams have figured out that they might necessarily win, but it rattles Tech. And I think Tech's still trying to deal with that. It's made things frustrating. Like yesterday, Tech played at a pretty high tempo simply because Pitt was pressing and trying to trap, and the zone can just be so frustrating to play against sometimes. So I think that's really what's given the Hokies a lot of problems. They can figure it out. I mean, they'll be golden. I think a lot of it comes down to passing and taking advantage of 3-point opportunities. I think Ashley Owusu coming back, who made her debut, returned from an injury, was out 7 weeks. She comes back, former All-American, immediately helps, made some really big passes, knocked down a 3. I think Tech's still trying to find its comfortability when it comes to playing against the zone.
No doubt about it. Wake Forest coming up next for the women's side. Should be an easier game for this team. But then you got Duke. You got a rematch in Charlottesville against Virginia, who hung in there. Syracuse is playing good ball. And then NC State. It doesn't get easier. Tough stretch coming up after the Wake Forest game for the women.
Like Kyle said, this league is good. And you're not going to have an easy game. Even though Pitt's not very good in comparison to the rest of the league, Pitt gave Tech a run for its money yesterday. Wake Forest will do the same on Sunday, though that's a game Tech should be able to win. But again, if teams are playing zone, kind of puts Tech into a bit of a corner, and there's only so much wiggle room. So it's really going to be interesting to see how this team handles getting Owusu back and getting her into the fold on Sunday against Wake Forest. Because then you go on the road, you got Duke and Virginia on the road, Syracuse, NC State around the corner. It doesn't really get much easier.
No, not at all.
Yeah, and I was wondering with Owusu's return, 5 points, but she did have that big 3-pointer. You're talking about how the zone is something that ACC teams are going to look at and show that that's an effective way to make one of the best offenses in not just the ACC but the country in the Hokies kind of struggle a little bit. And that's what the whole design is with Syracuse. Obviously, Gio and I can talk about that plenty back home with Boeheim, but you see that it's designed to force teams to shoot threes, and the Hokies did so semi-effectively. Not particularly this past game with only 25% from beyond the arc. With Owusu back, we know she can shoot the 3-ball decently well. I mean, that's what we got when we got her from the transfer portal. Her return, if she starts to sit beyond the arc a little bit more often, you think that's how she can become more effective if teams try and stick with the zone against the Hokies?
I think, honestly, her biggest value is in her passing. Sitting in the middle of the zone and picking her spots.
That's a zone buster too, though, right by the free throw line.
I mean, between her and Taylor Soule, look, this team is really talented, and this team's still winning games.
Right.
I guess there's just ways that they could be winning more efficiently. Having Owusu back, yeah, she can step out and hit some threes, but I also think that her passing, her ability to move the ball, that's one more person on the outside. That's another threat that opponents have to guard. Another threat where people are like, oh my God, I don't want this, I don't want her to try to slash down the lane on me. So we've got to defend her like this. It's I think in a little bit of a comparison, it's kind of like Hunter Couture, right? She's a bit of a gravitational shooter where you have to close her out. And I think there are a lot of those players like that for the Tech women's basketball team, right? I think you could probably say the same thing for Kayla King. But I think she will help make Tech more efficient because the looks that Tech will get should be better because teams will be emphasizing her more, if that makes sense.
Yeah. In your opinion right now, who's the best team in the conference?
I think you could say Virginia Tech. I might have to say Notre Dame.
Yeah, they're good.
I think if Tech played Notre Dame again, Tech with Owusu, Tech would win. It's tough.
It just had a tough fourth quarter. They led the whole game.
Yeah, I think you could say it's Virginia Tech, and that's kind of crazy to say. I think it's Virginia Tech or Notre Dame. I think Louisville and North Carolina are right up there. NC State and Duke have slipped a little bit recently, and so has Florida State. But this is a really good conference.
Now to stack on top of that, Gio, I wonder for you. We're talking about Tech being the best team in your opinion in the ACC, but which team do you see going farthest in the tournament? Because we saw the hopes with Virginia Tech last year, and they got a really good seed, and then Florida Gulf Coast came in.
I think it all kind of depends on the matchup.
Right.
Like NC State ran into UConn last year. That's not really fair.
True. Earlier too, wasn't
I think it was in Connecticut
in
was
stores.
it?
Yeah. And that's not really fair. So
was that what, the Sweet 16?
I think that might have been the Elite. Yeah, Carter says Elite A.
Okay.
I couldn't
Carter's
remember if
got
the
it.
Sweet 16 or Elite, but yeah, you run. It's just tough. I think it comes down to matchups. I think there are a lot of teams that can make deep runs. North Carolina beat Duke last night. Notre Dame is good, but how much is it just Olivia Miles? I think Tech might be the best well-rounded team, and that says a lot. But Louisville and Notre Dame both have some really good individual talent, and Haley Van Lith and Olivia Miles. North Carolina might be the second best put together team. So I'm really curious to kind of see how all the pieces play out.
All right, let's shift gears a little bit, briefly talk about Tech Talk Live last night. Some interesting stuff out of Mike Young, of course, but I really enjoyed listening to MJ Collins talk. Very well spoken, and he just had some interesting stuff about how his confidence has grown over these last couple of games, his insight in the game, and his life outside of basketball as well.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy. I actually wrote a feature on him a little bit ago. He's from South Carolina, so he gets to go back to South Carolina tomorrow. He said he's going to have about 25 people there. That's a lot for a basketball game, especially since there are only like 13 to 15 people on the team.
Right.
That's a lot of tickets. But no, he's a great guy, raised from a great family. He played at a couple different places for high school. The last stop was at Combine Academy just outside of Charlotte, and he's really grown. Mike Young mentioned how much he really enjoys coaching MJ. He's an awesome guy to talk to, very well spoken. And he takes pride in his defense. I think that's the most important thing. He was a scorer for so long in high school, and he's basically become a guy that Mike Young trusts to go out there and make a defensive stop, which says a lot because he's a true freshman who probably should not be playing this much if Rodney Rice wasn't hurt. He's an awesome kid, and very fortunate to have gone to talk to him and interview him a lot.
Yeah, I like that note on defense too. We all heard it. We were all there last night listening to it, and I think his attitude is remarkable for a freshman, especially a freshman in the spotlight, where they're giving him minutes that he wasn't necessarily expecting off the bat because of Rice's absence, and Camden is kind of stepping back and giving more of those off the bench minutes to Collins as he was early in the season. It's really cool to see his attitude. Was that something that you kind of noticed, how like optimistic he is despite maybe a lack of scoring, and being honest about the fact that defense is something that he's still learning as a freshman in college too? Yeah,
I think he knows his role.
Yeah.
And those are the kind of kids you want, right? Those are the kind of kids who I think, like Hunter Couture is a great example, right? Hunter Couture came in and did not expect to blow up right away, and did not expect to have the role he is now. Sit back, learn, become a good defender. As he said, defending is what gets you on the floor when there are other guys that score. And I think he'll become more confident as a scorer eventually. But if he can continue to play good defense, that is an attribute that you can't really take away, right? The scoring might not always be there, but if he's playing defense night in, night out, that's reliable. Yeah. I think his attitude, he's humble. He understands what position he's in. He understands, okay, I have an opportunity that maybe I wouldn't have gotten normally.
And the crowd loved him too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, the cheering, I was listening on the radio. I wasn't there, but the cheering was awesome. He's an awesome kid. I got to meet his parents. His parents are awesome. He knows his role and he knows his value, and Mike Young knows his value too. And he's coming along. He's still a freshman, which is crazy to think about. But assuming he keeps developing, he's going to be a really great player here.
Yeah, it feels like the town of Blacksburg preaches the sense of humility that any small town would in southwestern Virginia, and MJ Collins fits right into that role.
Yeah,
it's really cool to see.
Yeah.
My favorite part personally, because he was funny. He had some witty remarks. Is when Zach goes, you played your AAU ball for Team Curry. Wednesday, you see Steph Curry sitting courtside in JPJ. How cool was that? And he's like, I told the guys I might faint, and it was pretty funny.
Yeah,
I very much so enjoyed that interview.
He was hilarious, honestly. Yeah. That was probably the best. Not to make it a comparison, but the best segment of Tech Talk Live that we've had so far this year was with MJ Collins.
Yeah,
he worked great, and Zach hosted a great interview. You and I were joking beforehand. Zach Mackey, the voice of men's basketball, runs that segment. He didn't have any notes prepared because he knew that this kid would be conversational. It was really cool to see.
Yeah. It was definitely interesting there. All right. I think if we don't have any final remarks, time to wrap things up.
Yeah.
No.
All right. Awesome. Well, Virginia Tech men's basketball is on the road against Clemson on Saturday. Quick turnaround. About 48 hours later, they're playing inside Castle Coliseum against the Duke Blue Devils. And then on the other side, women's basketball game coming up on Sunday against the Demon Deacons of Wake Forest. That'll wrap things up on our Friday edition of TSL today. For Kyle Marshak, David Cunningham, Carter Hill, I'm Giovanni Heater. So long, and we'll see you next week.